government-centric problem solving is not like the best way to go, because the government cannot do everything. I would say youths are rarely the focus of social protection system, not only in Indonesia but also in many other countries, especially for those who are entering the labor market or who are transitioning from school to work.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Global Future Talks. This is Breaking Barriers podcast and Let's Solve the Future Now. My name is Cazadira F, Tamzil, and today, as always, we're joined by a fascinating speaker who is also a dear friend of mine, Marshiella Pandji.
Hi,
Azira. Marshiella is an expert in policy, politics, and economics.
I don't know if I can call myself an expert, but an enthusiast for sure.
Yes, enthusiast. And you're also a delegate of the Y20 Indonesia this year, one of the delegates?
Yes, correct.
Congratulations for your appointment.
Thank you very much.
Very happy to have you representing us.
Oh, thank you, Azira. Thank you very
so
much.
Yes. Okay, so we've known each other for quite a while because our moms are friends.
Our moms are friends. They're so cute.
And then we became colleagues, and then we volunteered also in the same youth organization. And
correct.
I always just find you a very analytical person, very sharp, and I know that you will have a lot of very interesting insight to share with our audience today.
Hopefully, yeah.
Thank you so much, Shils. Okay, so to start off, maybe you want to share to us a little bit about your journey, your background, how you got started into the politics, policy space.
Yeah. I think I've always been interested in public policy issues since school age, I would say. Well, initially, I was more interested in international relations, international affairs, something that I think we can say we share that kind of interest, given your own background. But, at that time, I wanted to become like a diplomat or like an ambassador. But I thought, in order to become a more effective or a good public official like that, I would have to have a more holistic knowledge of public policy issues. So that's why my interest maybe not shifted, but rather expanded a bit, toward wider development in public policy issues. So that's why, I took more diverse coursework during my undergrad, and then I ended up, taking triple majors, etc. So, and then I decided to continue my education. Post-grad, I did an MPA degree, Master of Public Administration, focusing on social policy, right? Because I think that's where my interest really lies, social and welfare policies. But at the same time, most of my initial work and internship experience, I would say, revolve around like business and economic policy worlds as well. I mean, we did share, professional work experience in the same sort of, strategic consultancy. But I think I've always been more of a generalist. I've always been in. I've always been interested in multiple aspects or multiple components of public policies. But currently, in my current role at the Executive Office of the President, I've kind of come back to like the social policy focus because currently I'm working under the Undersecretary on Human Development Affairs or issues, working specifically on social protection, women and children, and a little bit of health. Okay. So,
very busy, I imagine, with everything going on with COVID, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, fun fact, Sheila used to represent Indonesia at the Astronomy Olympiad.
Yes, I did. Back when I was in middle school and high school.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had actually a natural science background.
Correct.
But you've always maintained sort of an interest in public policy or
Correct.
international relations at first, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes people would conflate the two and think they're similar, but actually they're quite different, right?
Yeah.
Public policy is very concrete, very like, okay, what kind of regulations are there?
Yeah. Yes and no. Well, this is very interesting. Thank you for bringing this up because, when I was studying public policy in classroom settings, it was always about whether or not this policy is technocratically correct, or whether or not it has merits. Does it have real impact on people? But when I work in government now, I can see that that's not even the question. I mean, of course, that's the question initially. But then there are a host of other questions that need to be answered. Coordination and bureaucracy on the field, like whether or not that kind of policy can be enforced. Lots of political interest happening, so it's very, very interesting to see that when we talk about public policy, it's not only, whether or not it's good on paper, but whether or not we can
even
actually implement it.
Yeah, that's true. So you've actually been in different sides of the policy making landscape. Right now you're in the policy maker seat, I would say. Back then you used to probably work with a lot of private companies, right? Obviously we worked together. And then before that you worked for an international institutions, or one or two. So how would you say, how is your observation of the Indonesian policy making landscape in general, like especially maybe for human development, which is your area of interest right now?
It's very interesting because actually the president has a lot of he puts a lot of focus on human development issues, in particular for his second period of administration, which is great, right? And I think it's the right focus because with all this goals of Vision Indonesia 2045 and our discussions around demographic dividend, focus on human development is particularly what we need in order for us to reap those benefits and in order for us to achieve those long-term goals. But since you asked about policymaking landscape, I think there's a lot of things that we can improve. Obviously, is exactly what you're arguing in your op-ed and what your organization is trying to do as well, which is collaboration, right? I totally agree with you that government-centric problem solving is not like the best way to go, because the government cannot do everything. Especially in a country as big as Indonesia. I think a lot of people oftentimes forget about it, like how big of a country we are. We are massive
17,000 islands.
Exactly, and it's so hard to implement policies across
the board.
Exactly, and we have such a variety of people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, etc. We have lots of regional variation. So we also need to understand that there's a learning curve, and that there's a time sort of space that we need to go through in order for us to gradually improve our policy making, both in terms of formulating it but also implementing it.
Yeah, that's true. And to the point that governments can't do everything alone, there is a need for the private sector and the community sector to actually get engaged in policy making, right? Which is also one of the things that you're doing now with your participation in Y20. And before we get into that, I do want to touch a bit on what you think, for example, the private sector can do or the community sector can do. Maybe you can give one example of how you can see a better, more meaningful collaborative governance can actually help to solve a problem in Indonesia. And I think I also read an op-ed that you wrote about sort of building an inclusive, integrated social safety net, and how data plays an important part in that. And the private sector, I understand, they may have like more expertise on that, and maybe you want to share a little bit.
Lots to unpack there, but okay, maybe we can. I can try to explain it by examples. Just like a few days ago, I had a discussion with a person in ILO who's focused on youth employment, which is the kind of track or issue that I'm currently doing at Y20. And he said that one of the biggest problems in our employment, in youth employment in particular, is the lack of a proper and good labor information system. In the sense that our ministry or our government do not know what kind of skills and what kind of jobs are needed in the future. Like we don't have like good enough data to project it. So like we cannot do like the proper preparations for it. Like we cannot prepare the right skills and talents in order for us to anticipate the kind of jobs and skills that are needed in the future. So at the same time, the government cannot do all the work in terms of gathering all the data, making the models to predict the kind of skills and jobs needed in the future. It's actually the industry's expertise, right? Because they're the one who hires people. They're the one who know what kind of skills and talents they need, right? So we actually need more of their participation in order to help the government build such model or build such database, right? But in order for them to do so, we need to incentivize them properly.
Correct.
So yeah, that's one example of how a more collaborative approach can perhaps solve some of our problems. But it needs the right mechanism, it needs the right instrument. For example, the incentive that I mentioned just now, in order for it to work, right? Another thing, in social protection, for example, the government is currently, aiming to end extreme poverty by 2024, right? 0% extreme poverty by 2024. And one of the approaches that the government is having is exactly that, the collaboration between public and private, right? Government and private sector. How the non-government actors actually can contribute to complement whatever interventions that the governments are doing, right? Because from the government side, we have both the social protection aspect, like social aid, social insurance, but we also have the empowerment aspects. How we help people access better jobs, how we help them build their own business, etc., in order for them to access better standards of living. But what can non-government actors do in order to help and sort of complement those interventions? So
I think talking about like the op-ed that we did as well at Pijar Foundation, I think we're talking about collaborative governance also in the context of preparing us better for the future, because obviously, as you mentioned, we don't know exactly what the future holds, and the government cannot predict everything all on their own. So maybe there's like some modeling work that we need to do, some scenario planning and things like that. And the private sector may have a really strong role in there, but there needs to be a mechanism for more meaningful dialogues to take place, right? And sometimes in our experience, businesses, they feel like, the Indonesian landscape is very fragmented, I don't know what's going on, so sometimes the private sector also can get a little bit discouraged in a way before they get into policy making. But maybe because also some so there are still like a little bit of mistrust between these different sectors, partly because they speak different languages as well. So I think hopefully going in the future we can have really just a better way to communicate with each other. We may not always agree with each other, but at least we have a mechanism to basically speak with each other, right? It's a good start.
Just to add a point to that, sometimes people see the government as one single entity.
Right.
It's not. Especially in a country as big as Indonesia, we have lots of ministries, line ministries, technical ministries, lots of non-ministerial institutions, like the office that I'm currently working at. We have, I don't know how many public servants we have, but essentially we have such a big governments, and sometimes people expect us to be, one voice, where like, everything works solidly together. So of course, issues like coordination or like consistency of policy implementation would always be there, because it's always a challenge just to make sure that we can really work together.
And also, like, Indonesia has a very strong regional autonomy regime, right? So
exactly, that
it's
also
like central, and local. So.
Exactly.
And then local is also not unitary. It's
exactly.
Regency, provincial.
Exactly.
You name it, right? But I think it's good that I think youth today are hopefully getting more and more engaged also in the political process. So people like you, also with your participation in Y20, hopefully can help voice these things, and not make it like a taboo thing to discuss, right? Because if we don't talk about it, like, how are we going to get to the solution, right?
Exactly.
So on that note, Indonesia is the president of G20 this year, and part of the G20 process is that you have a lot of these different chambers of discussions, and one of which is the Youth 20, Y20, right? You want to maybe tell to us a little bit, to maybe the audience who's not as familiar, like, what is the significance of G20? Why is it important for all of us to get engaged in the G20 process? And what can we actually expect from the Indonesian G20 presidency this year, especially in the summit?
Well, historically, G20 is first and foremost an economic forum, right? It's an informal group of 20 of the world's biggest economies. I think its membership constitutes 85% of the world's economy, and then 65% of world's total population, 79% of international trade. So it's a powerful group of countries there. But along the way, it has structurally sort of evolved into more than just an economic forum, right? Initially, we only had the financial track. We call it financial track, where head of states and head of governments, and also financial ministers and central bank governors sit together and discuss financial policies.
Right.
And the challenges and the solutions at hand. But now we also have the non-financial track, or we call it the Sherpa track. And in this track, we discuss everything but financial, right? So all different types of public policy issues. And in order to help sort of support that discussion, G20 has different working groups as well as engagement groups. Now, Y20 or U20 is one of 10 engagement groups that the G20 has this year. So apart from Y20, we have Business 20, Civil 20, Science 20, essentially all different stakeholder groups that are there to make sure that the policy discussion processes in G20 is inclusive, right? To make sure that the voice of these different engagement groups are heard. So for Y20 in particular this year, we have 4 different tracks. So mine is youth employment, which is a legacy issue. It has always been an issue in Y20 from the years past. Digital transformation, and then sustainable and livable planet, and diversity and inclusion. So we're gonna try to produce a final policy communique, we call it, which is like a policy recommendation paper that we're gonna submit to the G20 leaders, so that it can be taken into account when these G20 leaders deliberate on the kind of declarations that they want to make at the end of the summit.
November, right, in Bali.
Correct.
Yeah. And so for anyone who may not be as familiar, like there have been a lot of discussions going on since I think the start of the year, right?
Yeah.
By Y20 and by all these other engagement groups, as well as the financial track, Sherpa track in general.
Yes.
And then all of that will sort of culminate in like series of policy communiques.
Correct.
Communicated to the heads of states and heads of governments, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you want to share to us a little bit about the key highlights in your discussions that you've led regarding youth employment. And it's also very interesting that I understand inclusion is an important theme that the Y20 Indonesia delegation tries to also highlight.
Yes, correct.
And that's why you've been holding like pre-summits outside of Java.
Correct.
Just to make sure that we are more inclusive, I guess, in our own dialogues and things like that.
Yes.
So maybe you want to share to us a little bit about the key highlights.
Sure. So far, for the youth employment track, we have 20 delegates, right? One from each G20 member states. And we've been working together on this communique that I talked about earlier. So for this year, for youth employment, the themes are social safety nets for informal and non-standard forms of employment. And then the second is youth social entrepreneurship. And so, our discussions revolve around these, but also actually other issues related to youth employment, namely, skill development, school to work transition, and things like that. So, we're still iterating our draft, but, some of the key ideas or key proposals that have been discussed are, for example, for social safety net, I think this is very important because youths are rarely the focus of social protection system, not only in Indonesia but also in many other countries, especially for those who are entering the labor market or who are transitioning from school to work. Now we know that there have been lots of mega trends that change the nature of work. Globalization, digitalization,
COVID-19.
Exactly. Climate change, transition to green economy, demographic changes, etc., etc. And all these changes, these have brought about new forms of employment.
Right.
Right. Platform workers are now ubiquitous gig workers, and stuff like that. And these kind of works are usually unstable, right? Because they usually, well, that's why they call it non-standard. Because when you think about standard jobs or standard works, you think about 9 to 5 jobs. You know that you're gonna still work at the same place tomorrow, and you know who your employers are. But for these non-standard workers, it's not like that. Right. So these are people who work as temporary workers or on-call workers or part-time workers, etc. And a lot of time these happen in the informal sector, right? Well, I guess by definition, right? Informal economy or informal jobs are those jobs where you don't have like a written employment contract in front of you. So you don't have job security. And oftentimes these are low-paying, low-quality jobs. And young people are especially vulnerable to getting into these precarious works, as we call it, right? And so we need to think about the kind of social protection, social safety net policies that we can make in order to protect these young people, right? First, we need to make sure that these young people do not get into these bad jobs in the first place, right? So here we talk about policies in the education and training world, right? How we can prep them with the right skills so that they get good jobs, right? How we strengthen our vocational education system, for example, because there is a mismatch between what the school outcomes, and what is needed in the labor market. So like the vocational education needs to come in the middle to sort of complement the education that people get from formal schooling, and help them transition to the real world of work, right? So essentially that skilling aspect needs to be improved. But then the second aspect is also we need to think about how we can protect those young people who are already in doing precarious work, right? In order to prevent them from falling further into socioeconomic exclusion. And this is where the social policy comes in focus, right? We need to make sure, for example, they are covered by social health and employment insurance. This is particularly relevant in the case of Indonesia because currently the government is actually trying to optimize the coverage of social insurance programs, right? I think we're doing okay in the health aspect, social health aspect, but we need a lot of improvement in the social employment aspect. I think currently we're at 30 or 40% of workers in Indonesia are protected by social employment insurance. So that we need to make sure that once. And then number two, even when these young people are covered by this insurance, we need to make sure that they actually can derive benefits from it.
Right.
Some young people, they're perhaps, obviously they will have shorter formal work histories than adults, right? But when we talk about social insurance programs, oftentimes they have certain eligibility requirements before you can claim the benefits of such social insurance. For example, you have to pay your premium for at least 12 months before you can actually claim the benefit of the program. So it'll be harder for young people to fulfill that. So maybe we need to start thinking about affirmative policies to relax these requirements, or also policies to help them actually afford to pay the premium fee of this insurance, because in Indonesia we have such program for social health insurance but not for social employment insurance. Right. We're in progress of doing that for the social employment insurance one. Other types of benefit that we can think of in order to protect these young people and to help them access better jobs. So not only we protect them through a social safety net, but also it has to become some sort of trampoline, right? To lift them up, to help them access better jobs. So the kind of social insurance benefits that we can offer to these young people should also include components of employment support. And this is actually an area that the government is already doing as well. Like since last year or 2 years ago, we have the unemployment insurance or unemployment benefits programs, which includes job search assistance and job search assistance or job sort of placement program, which is I think great and something that we need to always improve in terms of quality. So I think those are
I think the first step to that is obviously educating our youth that they should actually try to seek these social safety nets, right? Because I think a lot of people still do not know about what these are and the importance of that.
Exactly.
Right? So I think it goes both ways. Like you need to obviously get the employers also to partake more in the process, but also educating the youth so that they can actually voice that to their potential employers.
Correct.
Right? I think it's very important. Thanks so much for that, Chills. I think a very comprehensive explanation and the challenges of social safety nets for our youth employees, right? And so in the Y20 process, I understand that obviously you interact a lot with delegates from other countries and you share experiences, best practices, lessons learned. Any particular standouts that you would like to share to us? Any examples that we can implement here in Indonesia, or some good things that Indonesia has done that maybe can be a lesson learned for other countries as well?
I think, for my specific track, youth employment, right? Because it has always been an issue, in some sense, there hasn't been much development, if that makes sense. The kind of problems and the kind of solutions that are offered are that. Skilling, social protection, etc. Well, actually, the social protection aspect is kind of newer this year, because we have that threat of the emergence of informal and non-standard forms of employment. But in general, has always kind of been like that. But I think like Indonesia can offer some like good examples as well, because I know, like for example, the G20 has this employment working group, right, which consists of different ministers, different employment ministers from the G20 member states, as well as international organizations. And one of their key issues is how we can strengthen community-based vocational training centers. In Indonesia, we call it BLK, or Balai Latihan Kerja, which I believe not a lot of young people know about it. Or not a lot of Indonesians in general know about it. But actually, it has lots of potential to democratize access to education and training and to skill development, especially for young people who did not have the opportunity to go to formal schools. Right. So disadvantaged youth, young people coming from poor and vulnerable households, those living in remote areas or rural areas, these training centers can be an alternative to leverage in order for us to give them equal opportunities to skill development and to better jobs. And so this touch on your previous question about how we make sure more inclusiveness or inclusivity when we're talking about our policy making processes, is to make sure that we actually think about these disadvantaged groups, right? Because our policy interventions are first and foremost, it should be addressed to them because they're the ones who need the interventions the most. So I think that would be like one good example.
I think community-based intervention, as you mentioned, is very important.
Exactly.
In Indonesia, especially with all the 17,000 islands and obviously the geographical barriers between islands and all that. But also because there is still a technological divide.
Correct.
And oftentimes when I read stuff about skilling, they're always like tech-based skilling, which is very, very important, right? Pijar, we also try to do a lot of that, like how we reduce academia industry gap with technology, but actually there's still like an issue of technological divide, like in Indonesia in general.
Correct. And that's actually an issue that we bring forward in another track, which is digital transformation, how we need to ensure that we have equal access to digital infrastructure, and how internet is now a human right. You can say that, right? Because digital world is our world. Digital is the world right now. So you lose opportunities. You cannot participate effectively in the economy.
So it's amazing how all these tracks connect with each other.
Correct,
And
yeah.
it's important also not to just look at one track and see that they can
Correct.
provide solutions for all, but actually it's an integrated process.
Exactly.
Much like what we've been discussing about collaborative
Exactly.
governance, basically, right?
Exactly.
And especially when we're talking about like youth employment, it's not just a job of one ministry or one
Correct.
entity.
Yeah.
Actually, like
Exactly.
every party maybe is
Exactly.
every entity is involved in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the same logic also applies to questions about how we need to make sure, or how we can reap the benefits of demographic dividend or demographic bonus, right? I think that's one big sort of discourse happening in Indonesia right now, because apparently we're at our peak, until 2037 or something, according to the statistics agency. And well, it can only be a bonus if we do the appropriate preparations for it, right? Otherwise it will be a threat. So, in order for us to do so, then we need policy interventions in multiple sectors, right? In order for us to prime the right talent in anticipation of that kind of bonus. Not only in education, we talk a lot about skilling, but also in health sector, for example. We need to make sure our young people are healthy, right? And also social policy, we need to ensure that they are supported by appropriate social policy so that they can participate effectively in the economy. And then labor policies also, for sure, right? How we need to improve our active labor market policies and sort of link that to our social protection, so that, again, back to my previous point, we not only provide them with social safety net, but also like a trampoline, right? In order for us to help them access, better employment, better life.
Yeah. And if we're talking about demographic bonus, obviously youth play an important role in that, right? And Indonesia has all these grand future ambitions. Like they want to be the world's fifth largest economy by 2045, and all these amazing grand ambitions. And I think it's important for like the overall policymaking process to engage the youth more.
Exactly.
And it's great that there's Y20, right? That's like one good mechanism. I think overall, in your opinion, in your observation, how has youth been engaged in the policymaking process in Indonesia, and what can be done better, if we were talking about creating an environment where there is sustained communication?
That's a very important question. Well, just to add a little bit to that, currently, according to the UN, there's 1.8 billion young people in the world. It's the largest cohort of young people ever. So, it's necessary for us to include young people in the discussion, right, in the policy-making processes, etc. So, of course, I agree that Y20 is a good example of a mechanism that can be done in order for us to facilitate the process. But I think youth organizations play an important role as well. Like in Indonesia, we have lots of them, and I think there should be a more systematic sort of mechanism to include them in the process, right? Because so far, these youth organizations probably, they can visit like a ministerial office, or they can come to like my office, like ISP, and then do like a courtesy call or something, and discuss about the kind of issues they're concerned with and the kind of policy solutions that they offer. But it's it's just like that, right? There's
what happens after that?
Exactly. So a more inclusive forum, like consultation forum, is needed for us to make sure that these different stakeholder groups are involved sustainably in the process, and that involvement or that participation is institutionalized, right? To make sure continuity and accountability of the process.
Yeah, because if we're only looking at the number of youth organizations involved in or invited to a government ministry, maybe there's a lot. But then we can't just look at the numbers, because what will happen is there can be tokenism, or window dressing, but we don't actually probably take into account really their inputs in the decision-making process. So it's important. Sustainability of that involvement, I think, is important. Same as with Y20. I hope that the communique that you guys produce can actually be implemented into action, because at the end of the day, we need the action.
Exactly.
We don't want to just be involved in the process voicing things out, but we actually want to get real changes happening on the ground.
Yeah, but also an important note to that, since the G20 is an international forum, it's, it makes more sense if we push more like principle-based solutions rather than like practical ones, because obviously at the end of the day, each country has their own different national circumstances.
Right.
They have their own authority of the policies and programs that they are carrying out in their jurisdiction. So we prioritize pushing for principles, stances, right? In terms of implementation, it will be,
it has to be tailored into local and national context.
Exactly.
It's very interesting because I was talking to a colleague from one of the ASEAN countries the other day, and they were like, why should we care about G20, Our country is not part. He's from Vietnam. He's like, why should I care about that? Like, Vietnam's not part of the G20. But actually, as you mentioned, if we push for principle changes from these forums, then actually can hopefully be as a North Star maybe for other countries who are not even part of the G20. Right?
Exactly.
And Indonesia will be the chair for ASEAN next year. So it's more important and urgent, I guess, for ASEAN countries to care about the discussions and the outcomes from the G20 process. So
I agree.
Yeah, hopefully a lot more people will get engaged in the G20 process and also Y20. So for everyone who's listening, like hopefully you will take a look at YouTube at all the discussions that Marshiella and friends are facilitating, and hopefully you'll participate in that.
Yeah, but also what I like so far about the Y20 process is, you mentioned before how we have different pre-summit events in different parts of Indonesia, and in each occasion we got to meet with local youth, right? We had a town hall meeting with them, like an FGD, where they present their propose their solutions or recommendations on the issues at hand. And I think that's a wonderful process. We can actually meet these local young people, which they have lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm about activism and the issues that they care about. So that's great.
Yeah. And I think the inclusivity that's being pushed by the Y20 delegation this year is not just in terms of Java versus outside Java, but also people with special abilities, and also I think with refugees. And so I think it's really great broadening, because obviously people have different perspectives.
Exactly.
And hopefully we can have a good mechanism to cater into that.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the policymaking process in Indonesia, about youth employment as well. Now I want to talk about an issue that's also, I think, very close to our hearts, which is about women, right, and gender equality. And I'm curious as to how you think women is represented in the policymaking space in general, and what you think can be done better to provide support for women in this space.
Tough question. I think there has been some progress, of course, in Indonesia. The fact that we already had an Indonesian president is a great fact as well. But obviously we want more substantive participation of women in policymaking, right? But sadly, before we can go into that, there are more fundamental and basic issues that we need to address, right? In Indonesia, violence against women is still high, women and children, right? And then women are not, the labor force participation of women is much lower than that of men. And then even amongst women who work, more women work in informal sector compared to men. And then, of course, on average, women's income are slower as well. So, these are, fundamental issues that we need to, solve as well. I think the government is on the right track in terms of, acknowledging these issues and trying to work towards that. Among 5 of the president's sort of directives or directions for women and children's sector is actually empowerment of women in entrepreneurship, right? To include them more in economic activities, right? The other will be elimination of violence against women and children, and then the reduction of child marriage as well. It's one of the directives which I think is very relevant in this case, and we've done a good job since we had a new law that increased the minimum age for marriage from 16 to 19. I mean, it's hard to answer your question, but these are the more fundamental issues that I think we need to address as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good things that are already happening, right?
Yeah.
I think, as you mentioned, first step is acknowledging that the issue still persists.
Yeah.
We've talked about it a lot, but like, we need to do more. Like, I think as a whole of society, right? And back again to collaboration, I think it's important to also talk about what's happening at home and how mindsets are shaped, right? Because obviously how people act also come from their education at home, and so it's important for us to break the biases against women.
Exactly.
So before we actually get into more meaningful participation of women in the policymaking sphere, we actually have to also make some changes at home, hopefully, right?
Correct.
And talking also about like women in the professional world in general, like you're also a mom, and so it's really, I think, seeing more people like you, you're a mom, you're also very successful in your professional career. I think, it really becomes like a beacon of inspiration for a lot of people.
Hopefully,
they can also do that. Obviously, people have different circumstances, but I think having role models is important to help, build people's confidence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm curious as to like what you think can be done more in terms of what employers can do or what policies the government can issue to actually support women who want to take care of their children at home, or maybe the elderly at home, and also working. And I know one part of that obviously is equal sharing of the care work between men and women. But what can we actually do more as a society, you think?
Important questions. Maybe for governments first, one immediate example would be regulations or policies on leaves, right? Maternity versus paternity leaves. I think in the bill but they're trying to increase, right, maternity leave from 3 months to 6 months, which I think is great. And needed. Being a mom myself, I think that will be very helpful for new mothers. At the same time, paternity leave, I think my husband only got like 2 days. I mean, I'm sorry, but what is that?
What is that?
Right? It really reflects the kind of unbalance or different responsibilities, assigned to women and men when it comes to care work and childbearing, etc., as you mentioned before. I totally agree with you that our mindset needs to be changed first, in that women and men actually have equal responsibilities in doing housework and raising their children, right? As a society, I think it's fresh when you see lots of young people are more involved in policy discussions like this, as you mentioned before. Every time I open Twitter, for example, there are more and more woke young people who bring about issues such as these, which is great. But I think overall, we also need to remember that we have our own nuances when it comes to like local customs and norms and beliefs. So not everything that we see happening at the international level can be, applied directly in Indonesia, right? And I think we need to be aware of that and not 100% think that whatever it is that's going on outside Indonesia is the best, and that we need to follow it 100%. We also need to respect and take into account the different local customs and cultural sort of traits that we have as a nation. So again, pushing for principal changes, as you mentioned, right?
Exactly. As opposed to kind of being super prescriptive in the policies that we issue. But I think if we reshape minds at home, they will have a very big impact on the policies that are issued or the way that the market conducts itself as well. So hopefully. I mean, I'm very encouraged seeing that more and more companies, for example, provide free daycare, so that the mom and the dad can take turns and bring their children to the office, for example. I think, little stuff like that. Not little, but like I mean, like, one daycare can actually make such a big difference.
Yeah.
So hopefully going forward we can have more and more supportive environments.
Exactly.
Like again, reshaping minds. I think it's very important. Right?
Because it's a loss when women are not participating effectively in the economy, right? Because we're half of the population, and when we lost that half, then obviously the economy will maybe not suffer, but it's a disadvantage for the economy. So the more we can support women's participation in the labor force, all the better for everyone.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are trying to also kind of push this narrative that the way to build it back better is also to take care of issues that were already an issue long before COVID, such as gender inequality. And I think it's very important that we all take COVID-19 as a momentum to make changes not only to public health, but actually also to all these other aspects of life that are affected by the pandemic. So hopefully with your participation in Y20 and everyone else,
what it is that you're doing right now in your organization is great. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And really happy to talk with you, Shil. And do you have any last words you want to share with the audience? Final thoughts, things you maybe haven't said or you want to emphasize?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate that you're inviting me here to speak about these issues. I think lots of different young people are doing this kind of things right now, and I think that's a very positive development because more and more people are more aware of policy issues, and they're more willing to give their opinions and voices as well, which is essential when we talk about collaborative governance that we discussed earlier. It's very important that not only the government sort of set the narrative, but also the public, right? Especially the young people. As I said before, like we have currently the largest cohort of young people ever, and especially in Indonesia, I think 25% of the population is aged between 15 to 24. Anyway, so young people are very important, and we need to make sure that we have inclusive policy making processes, policy discussion processes, to make sure that their voices, their concerns are heard. And more importantly, the disadvantaged sort of segment of that group as well. We need to cater to their needs and make sure that we have more tailored approaches, more local grassroots mechanism to solve these issues together and make sure the process is inclusive for everyone.
Yeah. So inclusive process, and then also making sure that the voices that are heard are actually kind of followed up with concrete actions as well.
Correct.
And at the end of the day, it all starts at home, as we talked about, right? Reshaping minds at home. So, yeah, hopefully I'm more optimistic now than I've ever been, I guess.
That's good.
I hope more people will get engaged. And it all starts with just having small talks here and there. But
I agree.
It can turn into like a critical mass. So hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Azira.
Such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in Global Future Talks. This is Breaking Barriers podcast with Marshiella Pandji. Let's solve the future now.